I went deep, man. I went really deep on this thing, like more deep than I've gone on anything. And that's why I think it was really special to me too, is just how much, I just put everything I had, the whole bag at it, and I had to, like, I really, there was no way for me to do it without that. And I do think someone might come along that's so much stronger that can have some variation in that, they'd have more windows, to be able to climb it because they're stronger. But for me, I needed it all. Like, I needed everything.
Carlo Traversi, welcome back to the Testpiece podcast. This is the first time we've ever had an athlete come back months later, and just psyched it's you, man. How's it going? Welcome back.
Thanks, man. Stoked to be back. Yeah, I really enjoyed the first one, so definitely stoked for round 2 here.
Yeah, that first one was a freaking banger. It was number 47. Everyone go listen to it. Not that you have to listen to it first. Yeah, we could talk about a million and one things, but the reason I hit you back up to come on was your latest send of the dark side. You first ascent of just an absolutely iconic project in the heart of Camp 4. And you proposed V16 for the Boulder. And I made a comment on that post about how I thought it was a really big deal and that would go down in the history books. And so I want to dive into it more. So first of all, though, just congrats, Carlo. I really think that block is special. I'm sure you do too.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm stoked. It's very special for me in a lot of different ways, but mainly just due to how long I've tried it, and I think that the longer you try something, the more it creates this value for you, because you just fail and fail and fail and fail and fail, and so that success just feels like so much more important in that regard. And it was cool to have something that I could kind of pull together after that much effort, when I really, like, even the day that I did it, I was like laying on the pads and I was just like, is this stupid? Like, should I just quit this whole thing right now? Like, what am I doing here? Just try. I mean, in this boulder in particular is like super fickle with a number of kind of not objective, but just things that make it hard that aren't in your control. And it just really makes you start questioning kind of everything in that process. And I'm pretty hard-headed, pretty stubborn, especially when it comes to climbing. And so I'm happy I just kind of willed it out in some ways by just continuing to show up, and try.
I love that your message there is it was a miserable, awful, hard experience for a long, long time, which is why it's like my favorite boulder ever.
Yeah.
How long did it take? When did you start pulling on it? Or when did you even become aware of it?
Yeah, the awareness thing was odd because it's on such a popular boulder. And I saw that boulder in 2003 or 2004, one of my first times climbing in Yosemite. And then it was impossible for me to climb anything on there, Thriller, the Force, any of the climbs that were there. And when I returned years later and climbed Thriller and the Force and those, I still didn't really see that line. It doesn't, you see like this juggy rail system down and left that it starts on, and it just doesn't really seem to go anywhere. Like it feels like it just kind of is just there on the wall and there's nothing else around it. And I was looking at my phone the other day, and the first photo that I found, I think, was like from 2014 or 2015, maybe end of 2014, early
Decade.
2015. Yeah, and I had like some old pads on the ground below it and like a rope. And I'm pretty sure that was like the first day that I threw a rope over it and was just like, what's here? Like what can be done with this section of wall that is seemingly blank. And there's this kind of sloper system that it's just the angle of the wall kicks out just enough to kind of create what looks like maybe like a little bit of like a sloper shelf, and it's barely there. I mean, I love slopers, and even in font this would look like dog shit. And so but once you start chalking it up and really like seeing it all kind of put together, it really makes sense. Like, I think really sometimes putting chalk on stuff doesn't change it that much, but sometimes putting just chalk on it really brings something to life. You can really start to see the line. And I always think of that as kind of the birth of it, at least in my mind, was just putting chalk on it. And I don't know if I don't pretend like I'm the first person to put chalk on it, but certainly that year that I put chalk on it, there was no sign of any chalk, and it was mossy and dirty, and not like a an evident that people had been on it before. I think people had tried it probably in the past, and after talking with Randy and other people, I think that it had been messed with for sure and attempted. But for me, that was kind of the birth of it. Was that moment of putting chalk on it for the first time, and then it gets lodged in your head, and it's stuck there, and it was stuck there ever since. And um, yeah,
You
you just
know,
kind of tap into it over time. So
holds are really bad when they don't really appear until you put chalk on them. And I
yeah.
also I have this thing where, of course, lines can be striking on their own, but there's something about putting chalk on it. Some people I think consider chalk ugly, but I think chalk actually makes a climb beautiful and it feels like this is to be climbed. So you had gone and you had climbed Forest and Thriller, and this is on that boulder, and I
Hmm.
want to say it ends where the forest does. But when I'm kind of curious when you made a switch to be able to see lines at all. So a lot of people they go outdoors and they look in the guidebook and you say, okay, Thriller goes here to the right, uh, Forest goes to the left, here's the start hold. And it's very myopic. This is where the chalk is. This is where the guidebook tells me to go.
Hmm.
And when did you make a shift in your climbing career to even notice a jug rail system that had no chalk on it? Because I think that is a mindset shift that a lot of people, maybe even haven't gone through yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big shift, especially if you're coming from strictly climbing in the gym to now climbing outside, and having that feeling of just like there are really no rules, like, yeah, if you want to do a boulder, like a problem, sometimes there are some rules surrounding what people have done in the past, but that doesn't dictate what you can do on it. You can choose your path, whatever you want to do, but sometimes if that path is too much of a derivation from what other people have done and named and graded in the past, then that might be just a different variation or a different problem. And so I think that when you're looking at really, really pure climbs, you're looking for things that just don't have a lot of potential for variation from the line. And I think that's what makes really, really good lines what they are, is because you can't you can't go right or you can't go left. You just kind of have to follow this one very pure set of holds, and that's what makes finding lines outdoors really, really unique and interesting. And so I think it was pretty close after I started climbing that I started going to Yosemite, and I even started to see things that hadn't been done before. And um, I would be like, well, that's a cool feature, and I think that's the first thing, is you just see like holds, and you see like a feature on the wall, and you're like, oh, that's a cool hold, like let me go feel that. And then you're like, okay, like how do I, if the feature is 15 feet up, how do I get to that feature to climb on that feature? Is like, is there anything that leads me to that? And then once I'm at that feature, where can I get to the top of the boulder from there? And so there's a lot of different ways of spotting those things, but I think that that's kind of the first step for me, was just being like looking for really cool and interesting holds and inspiring features that are out there, and then figuring out how to connect the dots between them to make like an interesting line. And sometimes you go through that process and you realize that there's like 10 different exits and there's just too many holds everywhere, or there's not enough holds and you can't even, there's nothing to pull on to get to that feature. And then it's kind of like, well, do you jump start it? You get creative, can you jump start it? Can you like can you like start it a different way? Or is there one way that's way, way easier? There's just a lot of ways to approach it in that regard. And I think you just have to start going through the practice of like getting the inspiration from what's there, and then trying to draw lines between things and figure out what gets you stoked, what gets you inspired, what's doable, what's not doable, and just kind of go through that process with like a lot of different things, and then you start to see things, after that.
I love what you said about how there's no real rules in climbing. And coming from the gym, I think sometimes people don't remember that we're just out here climbing. It makes me think of Jason Kale. He talked about how one of his big draws to climbing was this freedom where
Hmm.
these, he considered things like football really like that's a sport because it has a regulation ball size and you have to, go 10 yards or whatever. And it was just freedom in climbing. And I think that's a really cool mindset shift that it's an important thing to me for climbing. And while you were just talking about these pure lines that kind of are obvious in some sense, it makes me think of Yosemite because Yosemite seems to be a place where boulders often almost stand alone. There's not a million variations of each climb. And then I couldn't help but think of that jump start in a pure line being King Air, where King Air is just this giant boulder and there's this big jug and you have to jump and grab it. And you go ahead and choose whichever way up. The way you're going up is going to be King Air. There's no other way. And I don't know, Yosemite has that special aesthetic, pure line quality to it, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what's drawn me to Yosemite from the beginning, but it also was what it defined how I viewed boulder problems from the get-go. Is that when I started climbing, I was climbing in Yosemite, and when you see a line, you were like, that's the line. Like, it's very, very obvious. It starts on these holds that are very obvious. It's the only place to pull on, and there's only one way to go. And it's lines like King Air and Midnight Lightning and all these ones that are just very, very clear that it definitely sculpted my perspective of what a good boulder problem is and what a pure line is. And I think that those years that I lived in Colorado, that started to feel like it got a lot murkier, and understanding what lines were. And I think for a long time I was really looking for specific things when I lived there. I was looking for that Yosemite pure line, and Colorado has that. They're just few and far between, especially in the harder ends. There just tends to be a lot more holds, a lot more variations, stuff crisscrosses. There's just a lot more opportunities to climb in different parts of the rock. And it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with that and just realize that there's nothing wrong with that. It just was different from my original vision of what I was inspired by and what got me stoked about certain boulder problems and whatnot. And I think it's cool because Colorado allows you so many opportunities and options that it's a really cool practice in and of itself to like find these different lines and variations and things. And there's just nothing wrong with it. It's just, I think I was always, due to my history in the valley and in California especially, I think Bishop has these insane lines, Yosemite has these insane lines, our California coast has some pretty special pure lines. It just, that's kind of what was just like a part of me from the beginning, I think.
I don't want to derail us into Colorado. I just have this image of, I think you did the FA of some like 12 called I want to say the Altruist. Is that what it
Yeah,
was?
yeah, yeah.
Dude,
The
that I
ultra.
just remember I did that get on the cover of a guidebook or something. I just remember seeing that and thinking that that's what I want to climb. That one looks
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. Well, yeah, California lines. I guess I'm into those aesthetics too, and Colorado definitely has them. But maybe just I'm talking my book because I grew up in the area, and I love hearing that you were inspired by them too. And before we get too deep into the dark side, actually, before we even go straight into Yosemite, I just want to give people a little context in case they haven't heard the last episode that Carlo, you have climbed. Well, you just climbed first to have another V16. You've climbed V16. You've climbed 515. You've climbed hard 514 trad in Yosemite. You've gotten first place in a bunch of competitions. So, yeah, just making sure if anyone hasn't seen your impressive tick list on AA.nu, they know where these opinions are coming from. Definitely an expert and really a great all around climber, which I think is really interesting because when we talk about Yosemite takes everything from you. It feels like there are slabs, there are roofs. And I guess I want to go back to when you first started going to Yosemite and what it was like and what climbs stood out to you as test pieces and kind of set you up on this journey that now is kind of culminated in this recent FA of the dark side.
Yeah, I mean, my first trips to Yosemite were before I could even drive, and I went there with friends from the gym that would drive my brother and I there for a weekend, and we'd climb. And it was mostly during the warmer months of the year because that was really the only time that I had to be able to get out and not be in school or just being a kid. So it was, it was a beatdown. It was like an absolutely savage beatdown, especially because, you're stoked about whatever grade you're climbing at the gym and you feel like you're progressing a lot, and then you just can't touch any of them in Yosemite. Like starting off on Cocaine Corner and blue suede shoes, and I mean, I think I was climbing like around V10 in the gym before, I could barely touch Midnight Lightning. And Midnight Lightning was like a 4 or 5 trip project for me when I was, 14, 15. And then I think I did it when I was either 15 or 16, somewhere around then. And, it wasn't my first V8. I had climbed others. I think I'd even maybe climbed V9 before before I climbed Midnight Lightning. So it just, Yosemite just was always this savage beatdown for me. And I did have one trip there in the winter time with my friend Simon Benkert, way back when. I think I was 16 and I picked him up and he was like 14 or 15. I picked him up in San Francisco and we drove there in February, and we just like slept in the dirt in Camp 4 for like 2 nights for the weekend or whatever. And it was like freezing cold. And it was the first time where I realized how important conditions were in climbing, because we ticked off a bunch of like V7s, V8s that trip, and that was kind of around the range that we were kind of pushing at that time. And I just remember being like, all these felt impossible in the summertime, and now they feel like pretty chill. Like we're just doing them all. And it was a good first kind of, I don't know, it just helped me be a little bit more knowledgeable about how important conditions were. And that was like the first time that I'd experienced that like sudden shift of just like, oh, okay, this is really important. And if I want to do well in these areas, that I need to come at the right times.
So of course, Midnight Lightning sticks out in your head because everyone has their Midnight Lightning story. Actually, dude, I did Midnight Lightning with you for the first time.
I remember that.
So the reason why I bring up that you pointed out is history, man. Like it's Midnight Lightning. And how does that weave into your feelings about Yosemite and boulder problems? And, why do we say, by the way, I did Midnight Light, like that's the one that I want to talk about. How is that
Yeah.
important to you?
I mean, Camp 4 was like, growing up was like my mecca, like that was, I read all the history books about Yosemite climbing. I read all about the old days in Camp 4, and just, it was up on a pedestal for me. And that was like my dream, was to just spend as much time around what I felt like was the epicenter of climbing, and I think it was because it was the closest place for me, but it also just has such a long history, of just being this extremely important, vital element of the climbing community, is like Camp 4. And it's where everybody kind of came together and created this community around climbing. And it's not one of the, I wouldn't say it's the first climbing community center, but it's definitely up there with one of the first, and especially for American climbing, it definitely was one of the most important aspects of kind of that early progression in rock climbing. And just knowing that that's kind of where all these old school climbers just kind of tested themselves, and where kind of bouldering kind of got like it's not its start, but it's in its infancy, and it was because they were trying to practice for walls and other things they were trying to do. And the Camp 4 boulders just were just kind of this ideal place right next to the campground, a lot of different styles of climbs to kind of test yourself on. And I think that's still the same today, and I think we prove it every day with the difficulty of climbs that can still be done there. And it's the full range, from really, really classic V0s all the way up through, all the different grades that are there. So
That movie Valley Uprising, I'm sure you've seen it. I must have watched that like 4 times. And I never watch movies multiple times, but yeah, if anyone's listening hasn't seen Valley Uprising, go watch. Just great climbing history on Yosemite. More big wall, but I don't know, if you love climbing, you love climbing. And that kind of brings me to my next question about you is, when did you tie in first? It's in Yosemite. It sounds like you went there as a boulderer, experienced Camp 4, but I know if you were reading those things, you were always looking at some other objectives with a rope. And I also know from your tick list that you've had success on a rope there. When did that shift happen for you?
So oddly, actually, it wasn't really a shift. My first trips there were trips, and we would just boulder in the evenings when we were done trad climbing. So I didn't when I grew up climbing. I mean, I bouldered a lot in the gym, but I also rope climbed a lot and kind of just did them both in tandem. If I had a partner, I would rope climb, and if I didn't, I would boulder. And my first trips to Yosemite were with older climbers, typically in their 20s and 30s, and most of them were stoked on route climbing objectives. And none of us were very strong, and so a lot of the objectives were like in the 5.7 to 5.9 range. And so my first trips there were climbing like the classic 5.7 cracks in Yosemite, and those were a beat down as well. I was like, I'm climbing 5.12 in the gym, and these 5.7s are like, I'm like barely getting up these things, they're slippery. I don't understand the techniques involved. They're scary, like and so my first trips there were mostly trad trips, with bouldering kind of sprinkled in the in between moments, usually in the mornings and the evenings when we'd been out trad climbing all day and we're just trying to get some extra moves in and stuff. So I grew up, yeah, trad climbing there, and that was a huge part of my kind of start as a climber. And I kind of always thought of myself as a trad climber until I started breaking into the V10 and harder thing, and then I moved to Colorado, and there was kind of this just big push on the bouldering end and less people for me to go trad climbing with. And my peers were mostly at that time bouldering, and that's kind of when I shifted mostly towards bouldering for a little while. But definitely the origins are like climbing the Grack and Jam Crack and Reed's Pinnacle Direct, and like all these. I climbed Generator Crack when I was like 15 or 16 as on like a
Good
top
job.
rope, just because I was like, if I want to climb the walls, I'm gonna have to be able to climb the off widths. So like, let's go find the single pitch off widths and climb these. And so my climbing education, was deeply rooted in all the valley styles, I would say.
God, I think we covered this last time, but just still blows my mind. I just I always have seen you boulder extremely hard, and I always loved your bouncy style of pogo and this kind of flowy dynamic thing. And then you keep telling me about how you do these technical. Not that dynamic and pogo isn't technical, and actually, I think that's the interesting point here is that technique is moving up the wall and figuring out the best way and being smooth. And it just, I don't know, it blows my mind hearing about this stuff, but I shouldn't be surprised, I guess. Uh, okay, let's go back to the bouldering arena. How, when you tackle something like the dark side, how did the techniques that you've built up over Yosemite come to play in something this difficult? Like, what was your process for attacking something that was, a notch harder than basically everything else you'd done in the valley at the time?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process getting to that point, I don't think I could have done this boulder. I could have done this boulder problem last year. I think I was really close to doing it last year, and I don't feel like I gained much in the way of like knowledge in that time, other than just like this year there was just a little bit more urgency to like my efforts and stuff. But yeah, that whole 10-year period was, it's an education, it's like a master's degree or a PhD in Yosemite bouldering, and I took it on that way. Like I wanted to go through the process. I didn't want to like try and skip ahead. And even when I tried to skip ahead a bit, I definitely would just get smacked in the face and realize that I'm missing steps here. I'm not learning what I need to be learning to like get on that level, specifically in this area. And I think that if you follow that process in Yosemite, you end up on the other side, just a much better overall climber. And so I don't think I realized that perspective in its entirety until kind of afterwards, in reflection. But I do think it was really important to just try and go through and do the classics of all the different styles, slabs, arêtes, slopey things, crimpy things, as many things as I could get my hands on, to try and learn from each of those kind of old school, new school, like everywhere in between, rock climbs. And Yosemite climbing is a feel area. Like you have to feel it. And I know that even when I'm not there throughout the summer and I come back in the fall, my first few days, I'm stronger than ever, but I don't feel it. Like I can tell there's tension where there shouldn't be tension in my body. I'm fighting things that I shouldn't be fighting. The stability in my feet is not the same as it should be. I'm not relaxed the way that I should be. And the way that I describe Yosemite climbing is that there's like this, it's almost like you find a way to root your feet into the granite, and there's so much tension in the feet, but you're also relaxed within that tension, and you learn how to operate with like these weird like subtleties of and stability and moving between them. And once I get into that mode in Yosemite, it takes me usually like a couple days to a couple weeks to feel really good there. Then I start to feel like I can start to make progress on projects and start to actually do well. And it's a weird thing, and I think it's what draws me to the area so much is um, how long it takes to kind of get back going in there. And I've never experienced that elsewhere. I can show up now in Font after not being there for a couple years and do well like pretty quickly. And I always thought of Font as being that more techie area, but I feel like once I kind of learned how to operate there, I can go back pretty quickly and know what to do. And I mean, Switzerland's got bigger holds. It's granite, but there's a little bit less subtlety to it because the holds are just bigger generally. It's more athletic climbing. It's less really specific footwork, really specific body position climbing. And there are, you know, anomalies there. There are problems that are more on the Yosemite end of it, but Yosemite, just due to the lack of holds, the lack of features, and the lower angle of a lot of the hard climbing, it's just so fickle in a technical sense. So
That footwork stuff you're talking about just brings me back where you have to put a ton of weight on your feet. But if you try to really put weight on your feet and like force it, it somehow skitters off. You can't have that big toe point. You have to kind of let your heels drop. You have to like relax into it. And the holds are so that type of grant is so directional. It's
yeah.
not, you really have to commit to the direction that the hold is asking you to, which makes for beautiful movement. So you said along the way that you got tested, or you had to rack up all this different experience and all these different climbs. Is there a handful that jump out in your head that taught you something specific along the way?
Yeah, the Dominator taught me more about my movement and ability to move in climbing than any problem I've ever tried. Period. And I spent more time on that boulder than I think I put probably more days into it than I did on the dark side even. And I got to emphasize that I wanted to do the Dominator the old school way, where I didn't use the heel hook, and I feel like the heel hook really changes the style of climbing on the Dominator. It turns it into, it's the same line, it's just a different challenge, and it's a different boulder in that way. It's not a different climb, different boulder problem, but it's just a different way of approaching the same set of holds. And the heel way, I tried a long time ago, and I knew that I could do it if I just increased my flexibility a little bit. And I felt like it's hard, and it's not an easy way to do the boulder by any means. And it's got its own complexities, but I was drawn to this movement that was kind of the more old school Jerry's method of doing it. And it was basically just not using a heel and just driving straight off the layback pinch to the edge, either holding the swing or keeping the toe. And um, I I always thought that I was going to hold the swing because I got so close to holding the swing for so long, and I even held the swing once, but I blew a pulley doing it like years ago. And then one year Nale came and I watched him do it, and he kept the toe on the low foot rail. And after I saw somebody do that, which I'd never seen before, I was like, I should try it that way. I should try and keep the toe. And I think that transition in beta was really important for my progression as a climber. And I learned so much from practicing that move about how I move on rock than anything any other climb could have taught me. And I think it's important to realize that I by taking a harder approach to it from the beginning, you also open yourself up to this big learning process. And it would have been easy to be like, I want to tick this boulder as fast as possible and I probably would have go back to the heel beta and just been able to do it sooner. But I think that one specifically, I wanted to do it a certain way, and through that process, I learned a lot more. And the specific thing that I learned on that boulder was how to keep weight on your foot while you're moving your hands. And the thing about that move is it tries to pull you out from the wall. And when I pull onto that, my only focus on that entire boulder is how much pressure I'm putting on my left toe. And as I stand up and do the move, the only thing that I'm thinking about is maintaining that pressure exactly throughout the move. And I think that that's one of the most difficult things you can do in climbing, where so much focus is on your hands. And what I did was I made it so that the hand moves were automatic. I didn't have to think about the hand moves. I did the hand moves over and over with my foot coming off, and just knew how much I needed to give it, how to grab the holds, everything, and just kind of program that in there. And then when I pull on the wall, I do not think about my hands at all. I don't think about what my arms are doing, anything. My entire focus while moving up and grabbing the first hold on the Dominator is how much pressure I'm putting on the toe and maintaining that pressure throughout the entire movement on the climb. And it was a huge learning experience to do that.
That ability to keep weight on a foot while you're kind of unloaded, like moving through the air, is so important. And it's really hard to teach people. I know you in ancient history used to do some clinics and stuff. Is that a thing you've ever tackled or tried to teach anyone? Because I have a really hard time explaining that concept to people who are used to, like, the heel hook method on the Dominator. You're static, and I know it's a heel, but the thought is still the same, where you have consistent weight, your whole body's tight, where when you move dynamically, you get a little loose, but keeping that pressure is crucial. Yeah. Any tricks for people to develop that ability other than go Dominator?
Yeah. Yeah. I got one that I teach people, and this one's a little bit of a head exploder, but it's helped me a lot in visualizing how to move on the wall. And I try to imagine that the wall is the moving element, and that the world is moving around me. I am the static force, and I am pushing the wall and in one direction, or pulling it in one direction. But if I pull too hard, it keeps going that direction. And so if there's not some way to balance out that force, then you're going to lose control of this spinning globe in front of you, essentially. And it's a really weird thing to think about in that way, but it has completely changed how I approach moving on rock climbs and how I find that balance in my technique. And if you think about both hands as a pulling force, if you just keep pulling, the walls are just going to disappear under you. You're going to keep going. You're the stable object, so you have to find a way to balance it all out. And I think that's a big reason why I used thumbs on all holds as much as possible, because it allows you to establish control over a hold in its independent, like, on that one hand, you have the ability to control the hold. You can push it away from you. You can pull it towards you. You can push it to the side of you. You can push it to the other side of you. You can, that thumb allows you to do that. Whereas if you just have four fingers on top of an edge, really the only thing that you can do with that hold to establish control over it is to pull down on it. Going side to side, it's easier for the hand to slip off. And then if you have to push it away from you, you can't, because there's no way to grab that edge. There's no way to kind of to get it to move away from you. And so if you think of each, hand and foot as an independent source of control, then you can start to manipulate the climb the way that you want it to be based off of the features that are there. So,
Dude, that was a good head exploder. It rings true to some of the other advice I've heard in more simple movements in the, like, weightlifting world. Like, when you put people in a deadlift, they say, don't pull the bar up, pull your body through the floor. Or in bench
yeah.
press, it's like, push yourself through the bench. So there's probably something there that's I'm gonna use that. That's awesome, man. Uh, Really quick on that idea of putting your thumb on, because I'm a big thumb presser on every hold, whether it's a crimp or whatever it may be, because I feel like it lets me control the rest of my body yeah, and keep that stable. I can go left and right.
Hmm.
When, I know you're maybe not a crimp specialist, despite the fact you've crimped the shit out of many small razors over the years. When do you decide, like, how often do you find do you always have your thumb down, or do you do that, make a fist full crimp pretty often still?
I avoid the full crimp like it's a plague. I think that there's almost no place for it ever. But there are moments where you do have to, because it allows you to put just a little bit of extra force and a little bit of extra control over a hold. So, I mean, on the dark side crimp, the one really, really bad crimp, I have to full crimp that, and I can't open hand it. But I'd say nearly everything I try to open hand or pinch grip nowadays, whether it's outside or in the gym. The gym is particularly important to use that pinch grip because everything sticks out from the wall. So everything is a pinch in the gym, no matter what the hold looks like, because it comes out of the wall. It always has a surface for the thumb, no matter what. Even the really, really big volumes and whatnots you can still find a way to utilize a thumb on them in one way or another. I think it's pretty rare to find something that you can't pinch in the gym, and it just allows you so much more capabilities as a gym climber.
That's
So
a really big difference in indoor climbing versus outdoor climbing. Do you remember those inset holds? Like there'd be holes in
yeah,
the wall and like a little circle, and yeah, those didn't really catch on, but just throwback
they're
there.
cool. They're cool, and I think they'd be rad to have if they like had a better way of like pulling them out and exchanging them and whatnot. And I just think people just were like, nah, we're not gonna dig into that anymore. So
So back to Dominator. I was thinking that everyone I know who's done it did it with the heel method. You mentioned seeing Nale do the move. I assume he did the problem. Do you know? Clearly, Jerry did it like that. Do you know if Chris did it without the heel, the way you did? Is he Chris Sharma? I mean,
yeah, Chris did it. He did dominate it as well with
yeah.
the original method, and I think he was
Wow.
18 when he did it, and he said he did it in June.
What?
Yeah, I know. He messaged me after I did it, and it was like, "Cool, man. I remember doing that thing." Like, and I was like, "Yeah, didn't you do it when you were 18?" And it was like the summertime. And he's like, "Yeah, I think it was June. It was pretty hot." And I was like, "Dude, you were a freak, man." Like, I don't know any kids that even the strongest kids that could do Dominator in June that way. Like, I think it would be even the strongest boulders in the world right now would have I mean, maybe someone could, but I think it would be in a serious, serious undertaking. And the fact that Chris did that back then I think it just proves how far ahead of everybody he was. And I think that if a young Chris Sharma, was born into the world now, he would be the best. He would be the best climber in the world, like immediately, again, and it's just, it's crazy to think about. It blows my mind, man. I don't know if anyone's felt that thing. I mean, if people have felt Dominator in the summer, it's like I can barely pull off the ground on the holds in the summertime. It is like an undertaking just to get your ass off the ground. So
Jesus, that was another mind blower. Yeah, young Chris, I mean, old Chris, any Chris, really quite an impressive athlete. The thing that was so mind blowing about Chris in those early years is that he wasn't just good, he was so much better than anyone else around that it kind of seemed fake. I feel like people didn't
yeah,
even take it seriously. It was just like, I don't know, it's just Chris. Like he's
yeah.
he's a mutant. So yeah, I love hearing those stories. I gotta make a comment about how much you learned on Dominator and how it was a big breakthrough for you. I think our mutual friend Max Solitukin made a comment when he finally did it that you should get like a lifetime achieve, or what did he say? He said something like you passed the granite test. Like you did Dominator. Of course, Max did it with a heel, so embarrassing. But I just think it's funny how, again, another iconic climb, you know?
I don't want to take away from people that climbed it with a heel. That's never been the intention. I think it's just you make a decision about what path you want to go there, and I think it's still a hard test piece rock climb, no matter how you approach it. It's just a different process that you're going to go through, and I decided that I wanted a specific experience out of it, and so that's what I went into it with, regardless of the time that it was going to take me to figure it out that way. And it just realized what was important to me about the boulder problem was the historical aspects of it, not just getting to the top. And also just knowing what it felt like what Jerry felt like, what Ben felt like back in the, you know, the early 90s when they did it that way. I wanted that feeling. I wanted to know where they were at then, you know, and in you know, like really feel it, you know, not just flail on it, but like know what that felt like. And that was what was important to me about it. And I think it's always been important. That historical, you know, component of rock climbing has always been super important to me. And you know, on Dominator especially, just because it's just sitting right there, and it kind of just screams at you like anytime you walk through that area.
I love that you embrace that historical side of things, and just it's mind blowing what Jerry and yeah, I forgot Ben Moon also, you know, marked his name on there.
Jerry, Ben, I think Chris did it. Chris obviously did it the original way. Jimmy did the stand the original way,
Mm.
but he switched to the heel for the sit. Um, and who else? I think that may, yeah, Nale. And yeah, I think like that's it for at least people doing Dominated, you know, from the original way. The funny thing too is Dominated gets a grade harder, or 13 or whatever, but I think I did Dominated like a couple tries, you know, like, or very quickly after doing Dominator, and it felt like it was the exact same thing. Like it didn't change anything for me. And
Yeah.
you know, that's why I felt like for me Dominator, the original Dominator from the stand was probably V13, and the sit was just the same. It's just like a sit start method. So
Yeah, I saw you did it like 5 days later. I was just lurking on your A-Day.
yeah. Close.
uh, yeah, the thing that's interesting about these test pieces of history, and I like that you're treating them as a historical climb, is it's always this question, like, how good was Jerry? Like, you know, it's like, oh, Jerry Moffat. I mean, actually, I feel like people don't even know who Jerry Moffat is anymore. He was a good climber. And it's always this question in my mind where it's like, how strong is the next? How strong is Carlo? You know, like what did he? How does he match up to those people before? And you know, it's interesting because we have all these new techniques, we have like new gear, but are the climbers really all that different? I think that's one of the draws of these test pieces, these iconic climbs. And I just applaud you for treating it like a rite of passage. Like, what did they do? Like, can I be there too? And yeah, I think that's really fun to bring that history component into it.
Yeah, I think it's for specifically for Yosemite bouldering is that, you know, uh, the intention was to keep the climbing there very much about the rock climbs, not about like the grades and the tick list and whatnot. And I never wanted it to be a place where people came to just like tick off, you know, like just come to fill their tick list and then they're out, you know. And there's areas that are like that, you know, people go and they're just like they want to just tick off as many hard things as they can, and they want to just fluff the list, you know. And that's how they feel good, is the volume of hard things they've done. And I hope that Yosemite in the future stays where, you know, you dig in on these things to learn something about yourself, to be a part of the community there, to learn about the history, about the boulders. There's just a little bit, I feel like there's always just been a little bit more to it than just like, you know, adding something to the tick list, you know, a little bit more of like a story element, a little bit more of an experience to it, rather than just like the green check mark that I hate horribly. So
Yeah, you do not go Yosemite to fluff your tick list. Although
yeah,
I do love going some places and fluffing my tick list sometimes. You can't. That's some type 1 fun.
it is.
After you've had
Yeah.
your type 2 fun in Yosemite.
I'm not, yeah, and I'm not hating on it. I do think it's cool to go do that too. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just cool to have areas that require you to like, to experience things a little bit differently. And I think it's cool that Yosemite is that way, because I think a lot of these climbs are more special than just like a quick tick list, you know, like thing. They're not just like a test of strength, you know, they're a test of like, you know, technique, ability, timing, you know, your ability to kind of be patient and stick with it and whatnot. So
Okay, Midnight Lightning, big experience there. Dominator. Any other one that we should add to a big lesson learned before we dive into the dark side?
um I don't have any others that were like really specific lessons. I have a circuit that I do in now in Camp 4 that I feel like has taught me a lot, which is where my warm up was cocaine corner, initial friction, blue suede shoes, and the phone book, which is right next
Jesus,
to the
that thing's hard.
Dominator. Yeah, yeah, it is. It is, but I learned it to the point where it's like I can just it feels like nothing now. It's like it's a very very easy warm up for me at this point, and you just learn the right way to pull and push and everything on it. So
I just want to interrupt you to point out for people who don't know those climbs that every single one is just all about weight on your feet. Like, I mean, initial friction is this V1 slab that is incredible and beautiful, and blue suede shoes, V5 slab. Cocaine Corner is just this classic arete climb that really focuses on balance and getting your feet up. Phone book is a one mover, but you have a weird pinch and the right foot really far out to the right that you have to rock onto. But rock on isn't even the right word for it. It's one of those more, yeah, I don't know, all about your feet, all about your feet.
yeah, so it really is about weighting the feet, getting your body weight over those feet, figuring out how to like kind of move around this feature rather than pulling your way through it, which I think is an important um, recognition about how to climb sometimes. But these climbs in particular, they're just classics of kind of that wine boulder circuit, and by adding them to my daily practice of climbing in that area and warming up, I just learned a lot about where I was at on a daily basis as a climber. And by having something that was stable to kind of compare myself to over time, was a really, really cool way to kind of track progress and get a feel for where I was at, and to just learn a lot on a daily basis about how to be more efficient, how to weight feet better, how to adapt, to different changing conditions and whatnot. And I'd say those for sure were just really important in that regard.
I gotta ask if you've ever done the Wizard. I'm just curious. I don't know if I've ever met anyone who's done the Wizard, and yeah, it's like this climb. Dean Potter put it up. You have to jump or do something interesting from an adjacent boulder to a clear ledge crimp, and then get to the top. And it's like a V10. But has anyone even done that other than
I,
Dean?
I I've never heard of anyone doing it. And I went out there I think with Nale and Randy one day, and all of us tried it and we couldn't stick the hold. At least that day. I don't know, maybe Nale went back and did it. I don't know, cuz sometimes Nale just does shit and you don't know about it, but I mean, we all got close. Like you run and jump off this boulder to catch this edge in the middle of the wall, and it's a pretty big edge. It's like two pad, not like kind of flat. It's just pretty far away and you're really high up when you jump. And I don't know, none of us could really figure it out. I think Randy may have figured out a static way to climb into it, so he could start off the ground on the right side and then climb into the rail. I
Mm.
remember him telling me something like that. Either he did it that way or that he knew of a way that you could do it where you didn't have to run and jump. But as far as I know, I don't know of anybody who's done the original jump way, and I've tried it a bit. And it's hard.
Yeah, only in Yosemite is there's like V10 with an obvious, obvious hold not get repeated for decades. Me and Mark Heel went out there and got somewhat close. Like, you keep thinking you can do it because it's a decent hold, but we stemmed from the boulder you jump off of and then kind of lerped over. And I think that goes. But yeah, if anyone listening has done it, yeah, actually send us a video, prove it.
Yeah, send us a video. I'd love to see it.
uh, so when you did this FA of Dark Side and you posted on Instagram and people are all psyched, I went out on a limb and I said, like, I think this is an important boulder that goes down in the history books, and I listed Midnight Lightning and the Dominator as kind of like test pieces in time that were important for specific reasons. And then I want to shovel the dark side in there too. But the the way I want to talk about that history that I think is really interesting is you see Midnight Lightning get done in the 70s, and it was, it's like a stunning achievement on its own. It's not surprising that when we think of bouldering, we think of Midnight Lightning, because if you walk up to it, even if you're a El Cap climb, you're an old school trad climber looking to, top out a multi pitch. There's something about standing beneath that boulder and then getting to the top of it that feels like an accomplishment unto itself. Where the Dominator kind of represents to me a newer era of bouldering. Like it's I don't want to say it's not dumpy. It's like, but it's just low ball. Like it's a, it could be a sit start if you're dominated, or it's a kind of crouch start almost. And just this whole thing being that it's not impressive exactly in its own right, but we understand as boulders how amazing that breakthrough in performance is. And so I think for me, I painted this picture of Midnight Lightning as an era, uh, Dominator as an era, and then I'm fast forwarding about almost 30 years to Dark Side. And before we get into that, I kind of want to ask you about some of the things that went up in those 30 years that maybe I'm just painting too broad a brush over that you think may represent another era in climbing in Yosemite too.
Oh man, there's a ton. There's a ton of boulders. I mean, there was the late 2000s with Tommy and Randy putting up like Dogwood and Park Life, and all that stuff was in that older Dosage film, kind of following them. And I think that was like kind of the first, or showcased the kind of the first push into that upper echelon of hard bouldering in the valley. And then Randy's been just kind of at it since then, and he's at it a lot. And there's a lot of really hard stuff. He put up Junebug, which unfortunately got chipped after he did it. That made it easier, but I think that could have been, if it. I think it could have been close to the first V14 in Yosemite. I think Jimmy said he repeated it without the chipped hold and still thought that it was probably in the V13 range. I haven't repeated that one. I haven't climbed on. I climbed on it before it got chipped, and I thought it was incredible, and it kind of beat me down. And then when it got chipped, it kind of bummed me out, to be honest, because it sucks to have something that you felt like was kind of a really cool standard for climbing there. And yeah, I kind of left it alone for a while, just because I was like, man, it kind of just like, it's like kind of sad to see something after it's been
Who
chipped.
did that? Did anyone even figure, like, of all the
No.
climbs that someone could chip, like, I just have no idea why that was. Yeah, that's just horrifying.
I have no idea, and it sucks. It really bummed me out, and I know it bummed Randy out a ton. And yeah, it's hard for me to go look at things after they've been chipped that way. It brings me like a deep level of sadness, unfortunately. So I haven't repeated that one, but that was kind of a big step forward. I think Randy's put up a couple other that were in that V13 range. Mark Heel did the Abattoir. That was a kind of a big first step, although I still maintain that that's maybe in the V12 range. But
Hold
at least
on.
Yosemite.
I just got, this is the best 8A comment ever. There's Mark who put, this is a beautiful prow in Candy. Really, I was going to point that out as I thought that was a really cool climb that got put up in that era. And he graded it. Actually, he graded it V12. And then Carlo, I was like, dude, you should put V13 on. Like, I definitely was part of the camp of like, put V13 on it. Like, it was hard. And then right above the comment of Mark changing it to V13 or saying, the FA is Carlo saying there are no 8Bs in Yosemite and rates of V12. I was just like, oh, I'm sorry.
The comment was kind of a joke, but honestly,
Yeah.
so when I went there with Mark to try it after he had done it, and I almost flashed it. I got my hand in the lip jug on the flash go, and I thought I was going to flash it for sure. I felt like it was not so bad, and then I think I put 4 days into it and just could not stick that last hold. Every try I would fall on that last move, and that's where I had a conversation with him, and I was like, this might be V13. Like feels pretty hard, dude. I'm just not doing it, And then I actually came back and I redid the beta, and I didn't do the same jump that he did. And I thought that with the new beta that I found, which was to go outright to this hold and then heel hook, and I go to the finish hold with my left hand instead. And once I figured out that beta, I did it like very fast. And that's kind of where I was like, I had these conversations with him about it being V13. And then I figured out a completely new way to do what was the crux for me that felt really, really manageable. And that's where I was kind of like, this is probably V12, like, especially compared to like where the level I felt like was at for Yosemite at the time and whatnot. I think in Switzerland, that would be 100% V13, but we definitely went through a long period of grade suppression, I would say, a 10-year grade suppression in Yosemite. So
well, still a really, really cool addition to
it's amazing.
Yosemite. Yeah. Just a beautiful, beautiful climb. Really interesting first start. Oh God, Yosemite is just, I said this before. It's so interesting how it's really techy, but then also almost World Cuppy. Like there's just this combination of movements that requires that is hard to pigeonhole. It's like, we say it's techy or it's technical, but that just does not encompass what Yosemite is. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Any other things jump out? I think that for me, one of the reasons why I put Dark Side up there as being a really important send for this generation is that it seems to combine a lot of these different elements that we're talking about that we love about Yosemite, where tall, beautiful, striking, and then there's this hard element that Dominator exemplifies, where maybe it's not the most striking line, but boy, is it just a mastery in technique in Yosemite. And then the dark side's interesting because it's not that steep. Like it's not a roof exactly, but it is tall and beautiful, and it all kind of weaves these things together. And so maybe we can segue into the dark side and what makes it special. Like maybe pay us a picture of where this is, why it's so striking for you and for everyone who walks past it.
Yeah, I mean, a long time, the progression was going in the way of like finding just the steeper climbs that had a little bit more athletic movement and had holds to really grip and just gave you just enough to kind of to get through. And the dark side's definitely a little bit of a glimpse back into the old school where the climbing isn't it's not really athletic at all. I would liken it to like hangboarding. I feel like I'm hangboarding when I'm trying it. Like, and my long days on it felt like I was just doing a hangboard workout because most of the time you're just shuffling through these horrible holds and you're not really moving very far. You're not jumping to anything. There's nothing extraordinary about the movement at all. It's the line that's extraordinary, and it's the fact that you're able to stick to this thing through a series of very bad crimps and very bad slopers and then very bad crimps again throughout the length of it. And it's a very, very unique style. Like I've never tried anything remotely close to the way that boulder climbs. And I think that's what makes it super unique, super special. And I do think that it's this cool, um, it requires the same level of technique that the other classics of Camp 4 require, but just at like the highest possible level. And I think that that's what makes it such an important addition to that area, but also the fact that it's just such a gorgeous line and it's such an independent, beautiful line, and it just sits there on one of the most popular boulders and one of the coolest faces in Yosemite for bouldering, which is that with Thriller and the Force and whatnot are just super iconic, and it's as good or better in terms of a line than those. And I think that
Oh
that's
yeah.
what kind of screams a classic to me. It's not hiding kind of in the shadows of these other more iconic lines. I think it's just as good if not better. So
Well, when you put chalk on the dark side, it's a very clear line with that big sloper rail. When you look at something like I don't know, like Thriller has the ice cream cone, this really chalked up block, but it's not as featurey. It's kind of like, okay, like there's a crimp here, at the top, you can't really see, it's kind of like a seam versus just, hey, like this is the line. And it is really cool how all this stuff we've been talking about is in Camp 4. Like Camp 4, the birthplace of American climbing in a lot of ways. Or I don't know if I want to say birthplace. A lot of climbing has been done. A lot of amazing climbers have laid their head down, just 500 feet away from all these boulders that we're talking about. And I know that aesthetics and lines, there's probably boulders out there that are in Alaska that are unbelievably beautiful, but there's something to be said for climbs that are right there and staring you in the face. And maybe it's because we're all a touch lazy. I don't know. I'm willing to hike, but I love me a roadside mega that's just right there. And I think it's really cool that this is just sat there. I mean, how
mhm.
many, my guess is, people recognized it back in the 90s. And this, I mean, how could you not? It's right there.
Yeah,
And yeah, so I think that makes it special and part of history because of that.
for sure. Yeah, I agree. It's just because it's just there, and it's iconic as it is, as a project, as anything, so
So okay, it starts on a little jug rail on
yeah.
the bottom left of this boulder, and then it goes through a sloper rail. Like, yeah, can you just kind of break down the chunks, how you chunked the climb?
Yeah, so it's got like an intro bit. I'd say it's maybe like V9 could be a little bit harder. It's a really weird, the weird thing about the start is that if you wanted to just go grab the holds of like the two crimps that make up the crux, it's you could probably do that at like the V7 grade. But the problem is that your feet would be in the wrong place to go into the rest of the boulder problem. So if I reach my right hand to the first slopey rail hold off the jug, I could put my heel up on the jug and I can cross over to the crimp, and it's very easy, very, very easy to cross to the crimp. And then I can reach over to the intermediate, and I'm sitting there with my heel at head level, and I've easily gotten to these crux holds, but now I cannot. I can't. I mean, I'm decently strong at crimps. I think there are stronger people on crimps, but I've never seen anyone walk their feet down from that heel to the foothold that's very far to the right to get into the upper section. Even Jimmy had a different method for it than a heel. Sean Rabitou tried it. I actually used his method for getting into the crimps. It's just, it doesn't allow you to get through there. And even if you do, you've just traded like a V7, from like a V9 or whatever into the hardest footwalk of your life, like holding on while you're walking your feet is probably V12 or V13 on its own. And so what I opted for was kicking my feet to the foothold early. So I basically grab the first hold and then I kick my right foot, like karate kick, like almost full extension to this slopey foothold ahead of my body. And then I have to pull through into the crimps with my foot like ahead of me. And so that motion is really hard to get into the crimps, but it then means that when you're on them, your foot's in the right spot for getting into the rest of the boulder problem. So it's weird. It's like if you chose the wrong beta, or the beta that's not going to really help you, it'd be very easy to get to the crimp holds. But if you choose the right beta, it's going to add a lot of difficulty to get into them, but then you're going to be set up for the rest of it. So it's kind of a weird way to like approach it. But basically once you get off that jug rail, you're into these two, like a left-hand crimp that is just very small and very sharp. And it comes down to one pointer finger crystal that is the devil. And you grab a 2-finger quarter pad intermediate, and it helps you to rock your weight up onto the slopey foot. And then you can grab a very far lock off to a bad right hand sloper, and then I bump to a slightly better part of kind of the start of the sloper rail. And then from there, you're basically just shuffling across this sloper rail for, I'd say it's like 6-7 moves of shuffling, and just these really distinct patches that kind of work. And then you kind of pull up off the sloper rail to a very, very thin crimp rail. You shuffle that for a couple moves until you get to a high right hand Gaston. And then you can reach up, you do a big lock off to the last kind of holds on the force, and then it's over. So, and there's a lot of footwork in that shuffling. Like I can campus the sloper rail without feet. And that's kind of where I got to in that progression, was that on a good day I could campus it, but you're not going to campus it and then do the end of the problem. So you need to work the feet so that you have the energy and the skin and everything ready to do the last bit of it. So
Where was the redpoint crux for you? Where were you getting to frustratingly each time?
Initially it was the crimp section and just getting the crimp right and doing the lock off. But the ending, when like I was getting very, very close to sending, it was, I would grab the first good spot on the sloper rail off of the crux crimp, and then I would fall coming in to match it, or I would fall shuffling my hands into the right position to keep progressing on the sloper rail. And that was due to either like skin just being a little bit too wet by the time I got there, or too dry. There were days that it were too dry and I would just dry fire off of them, or I would lose tension off the foot, or my foot would pick, or my like one finger would be off by like a crystal, like one crystal to the right or left, and then I would lose it. And so that part was definitely the red point crux. And last year I fell once past that, and I was at the end of the sloper rail, and I slipped off the sloper rail, and I couldn't figure out why, because it was really good conditions. And I looked down and I was just bleeding out of my tip, and I fell off because I had so much blood on my finger. Um, and that really became the redpoint crux, was getting through the bottom without splitting. And it's an absolute nightmare in terms of skin conditions for this boulder. It's the worst it could possibly be.
Oh, it just sounds so fun. Good old Yosemite type 2. I was out there in maybe 2017 or 18 and watched Jimmy kind of had sieged it that winter, and
Yeah,
I'm sure you had been climbing on it too, but I just happened to see him do pretty well on it. Yet it seemed like he had one try or something, or maybe two
yeah.
tries, and conditions were just fickle, and that looks frustrating. I'm just kind of curious when I hear about all these micro betas, it's kind of tough for me to understand how you figure out these perfect betas on something that is so close to impossible. Where if you have a crystal off, or if you choose the wrong foot crystal, because I my hunch is when you say like the slopey foot, it's like, okay, that's the one foot that we actually know about. But then I'm guessing that a lot of the feet you use when you're shuffling across are just kind of feet, quote unquote, where you just say, this is a foot. And so, how did you go about deconstructing this climb, which has a ton of moves? They're all very technical, low percentage, and condition dependent. So, how do you even know when maybe that is the right beta, but you just needed it to be a little drier or something? Like, how you piece a puzzle so complex together?
Yeah, I think it's a really hard question to answer, but it's really just time on it and experience in different conditions, and knowing what works and doesn't work, and then constantly revisiting the beta. And I think that I constantly am doing that, even in the later stages of projecting. I'm not like, I'm set on this, because if you're too set, you don't open yourself up to the possibility of something easier kind of coming out of the woodwork. And even the last couple days that I was on it, I was still like editing little things, like very little edits about where my flag foot was positioned on the wall for certain moves, and does having the flag foot be there or the flag foot over there, how does that change the motion of the climb? Like all of those little how the position of my shoe was on it, where I was placing the toe initially, so that later on it was going to find the right spot or stay in the right spot throughout the course of the moves. I had every crystal memorized. Like I could literally go through it right now and tell you where every single crystal of every finger. And that's the weird thing about Yosemite, is it's like every hold, every finger has its independent crystal that it needs to find. And that's for every grip. And it's, 17 moves, I think, to the edge on, on the force. And I can tell you every crystal for every finger for every one of those moves, and how it needs to be lined up so that I can make it the easiest way through that. And it was just time spent experimenting with different grip positions, experimenting with different ways of grabbing it. I went through 12, 15 different betas, I bet. And they were very, very slight adjustments. If I told you about, if I was there explaining them to you, you'd probably understand it. But a lot of times it was just like, oh yeah, just a little shift of the wrist over here aligns up these fingers with these crystals in this way. And it becomes a little bit easier to make space for this hand to come in and find these crystals, which help for this next move, and all those little adjustments helped a lot. And I was constantly experimenting with different ways of conserving energy, conserving time on certain holds, and opening up space for hands to grab things in different ways. And that's the other thing that I think is going to be weird, is that I think everyone's hands are slightly different. So how I'm grabbing these crystals is going to change. Like everybody's going to grab them, they'll hold slightly differently depending on like how long their pinky is compared to their middle finger, and where their thumb's at on the wall, and all that stuff's going to change a little bit for each subsequent attempter. So
That's wild, man. That is detailed. I
super
love.
specific, man.
I'm curious.
Super specific.
Did you ever like write this down? Like sometimes when I go to a climb, I know I'm not going to be at for a while. I'll take a video and I'll like talk to myself about where my hands are. Like, do you ever write things in a journal or anything like that?
No, I take a lot of video of myself, so I'm always filming like my attempts, and there's specific times where I'll film specifically to like analyze body positioning, and to be able to go back later and be like, because you'll go deep down a beta road and then just be like, okay, I want to know what it looked like when I was doing it 4 or 5 betas ago. And so I'll go back and look at the old footage and just be like, I think that was better. Like, I think that was more efficient the old way. And then I'll go back and try the old way because of that. So I'm constantly analyzing those things, kind of over time. I don't write things down. I think it, for me, my memory is one of the most important aspects of my climbing, because I think it does such a good job of programming like the way that I move by like just remembering it. And the more I remember it, the more it just becomes a part of, the motion, and not something that I have to think about or think through. And when it goes down on paper, it almost becomes for me like a little bit more visual rather than just like a part of this feeling that I have. And I think everybody's different in terms of how they take in information and recall stuff, but I've always been a little bit more of just like how it feels and like where the positioning of things are. So writing it down hasn't been super helpful, but the video element is.
Yeah, you talked about that from the very beginning about Yosemite, that having to feel it, and it's yeah, it's a little, it's ineffable. So we won't try
Yeah.
to.
I get more of a feeling from watching video than I do from anything else. Like if I'm
Mm.
watching a film of it, I can put myself in there and feel what's happening while it's going on while I'm watching it. So I know it's a visual way of seeing it again, but I feel like it brings back the most like kind of visceral feeling of what it was like, in that way. So
How do you deal with conditions? Well, there's dealing with conditions, and then there's understanding what conditions are the best. And you were talking about sometimes it's too dry, sometimes it's too humid. And it makes me think of that climb nearby, Stick It. And I always think of, I guess, was it Randy you did it first, where you got to lick it to stick it, just like it was so dry when he did it that he needed to add moisture to stick. And
yeah.
I guess, like, do you have any tools? Like, do you bring one of those little humidity things, or like, how do you, I mean, maybe, yeah, how do you understand if today's good, and today's the time for some really hard tries?
Yeah, temperature and humidity sensor, although I found that things were changing pretty rapidly at the boulder. And so sometimes the window of time was smaller than I thought it was going to be. But I also have a fan, a leaf blower. I use that temp and humidity monitor a lot to kind of like, and then I regulate it with those devices. And then I have a water bottle usually that I'll put on my hands with water. I have some wet chalk that I use. That's chalk that like I've made it a little bit wet to try
What?
and increase friction, and that helps a lot. I found that helped a lot in font, too, was like using wet chalk a lot. And then I've got chalk that is like kind of new in the bag and tends to not have been exposed to the humidity around. I thought that was helpful in some ways if I needed to alter what the experience was really quickly. And then I use some liquid. I have like 2 or 3 different types of liquid chalk that I use that have different drying components in it. So they're different chalks to start with, and then they have different, either it's ethanol alcohol or rubbing alcohol, and then I use rubbing alcohol as well. I have like a sprayer of rubbing alcohol, and that's to get oils off my skin. But all these things, like, I don't know how all of them interact with each other perfectly in any way, but I do know that if things are feeling really bad in one direction, if you have these tools available, you can change the course of the session by like utilizing one of these in an extreme way sometimes. And so that was helpful. And then sometimes it was just being there at the right time. And I found out from the dark side, it was just, I just have to show up regularly, and I have to try, and I have to feel it, and I just have to be ready when the timing is right. And that's what I found out. And I just made sure that when I felt good, I showed up and was there. I warmed up properly. I went through all the things. And there were many, many days where I would go through my warm up and I would mess around on the sloper rail a little bit. And I would just be like, today is not the day. And I would leave. And then I would come back another day and just to feel it out. And then if the sloper rail felt good, then I would kind of go into a further warm up process. And then I would go into that like do or die mode where I'm like, because with the splits, I was splitting on my good days. I would split in 1 or 2 tries from the start, like almost like it's just the way that it was. And it sucks because you really, when you pull off and you get onto that crimp, the minute you load it, that's your try. Like if you fall off there, it like right after loading it, that's still your effort. And so you can't, you just have to commit 100%. And it's the most kind of do or die feeling I've had in climbing, was interacting with that part of the boulder problem and realizing I'm not going to get a lot of tries on this thing, and I have to be there and show up for the moments that count. And the splits too, they would take about 10 days to heal, because it would take me 3 days for them to close up, but then the skin is weak even when it doesn't look like it is. And so if I got on it too fast, it would split immediately. Like on that first try, it would split like every time. And so I had to give it 10 days for the skin to like fully recover and not have like that, like just kind of weak layer around it, so that I could get at least one or two more tries on the boulder. So
Dude,
that's a
that's
lot.
fucking
I know, dude.
that's fucking
It's a
wild.
lot. I went deep, man. I went really deep on this thing, like more deep than I've gone on anything. And that's why I think it was really special to me too, is just how much, I just put everything I had, the whole bag at it, and I had to, like, I really, there was no way for me to do it without that. And I do think someone might come along with that's so much stronger, that can have some variation in that, they'd have more windows, to be able to climb it because they're stronger. But for me, I needed it all. Like, I needed everything.
I'm so happy that it worked out for you, man. That's really cool. Just hearing you go
Thanks.
that deep and having success. So just to still kind of pick at how deep you went, when you know that a a try is, you said do or die, just really really important. Do you have anything special that you go through to really show up in that moment? I mean, I know it's kind of a quote unquote muscle that you've developed throughout your whole career, but do you have a ritual? Is there anything that you would advise people when they have that moment? I mean, I think one thing is that people often don't do is just recognizing like this is a moment. Like I need to show up for this moment. But how do you do that?
I don't have a trick for it, I would say. I think that's maybe something that I've just kind of had in my life, like without having to like practice it. There's been moments where I've had a harder time finding it, um, but I kind of don't force it. If I can't find it, then it's like it's just not the right moment. But things that I really care about, things that I really want to do, and I know that this is like the moment, to like give it. You can't care too much. If you care too much, you're gonna like wig yourself out and stuff. So I think there's a way to just kind of convince yourself that like this is an opportunity. Do everything you can to take, to make use of this opportunity that's in front of you, but also understand that like if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. Like, somewhere down the line, you're going to get another opportunity. Most likely, it may not be as quick as you want it to be or whatever, but there's other things you want to do too. So take advantage of this moment, and I think you need to allow yourself some space for that, because I think if you feel like this is it, I'm going to die if I don't do it right now, that I think it can add unnecessary stress to a situation for sure, and you're not going to perform at your best. Um, and yeah, I think maybe there was some moments where I over kind of like, I was just like, I got too hyped up, I think sometimes, where it felt too good, and I was just like, right now, it needs to happen now, and I kind of rushed it. And I definitely had that. I had a couple of those days where I like should have probably done it because the conditions were conducive to it, and I just was a little bit shaky or a little bit like flustered and not executing right. And so there's a balance there of just being like calm with yourself, but also when you pull on, you just have to go dead, like you're not thinking, you're not reacting, you're not being emotional about anything. You just kind of like, you let things just play out, and you don't try and overthink it, so I've been good about that in my life. I think in comps, it always brings it out of me. In most of my climbing life, I feel like I've been able to tap into that without a lot of effort, that kind of flow state, it just brings it out of me, just naturally, which is something I feel grateful for sure.
So how did that send feel when it actually all did come together? Can you take me to that moment when it did work out?
It was good. I mean, yeah, so that day I got two tries on it, which was, or it was, I did it on my third try of the day, which was pretty crazy to me. And so I think that was actually, so first try, I felt really good. And I was like, whoa, the bottom felt better than ever. The sloper rail felt not as good as it had felt in the past when I tried it off the ladder. And I was like, okay, but it's good enough. And I got through the sloper rail section kind of on its own. And I was like, it's enough to get through it. I can fight through that, you know? And so I started trying from the start, and the first try felt really good. And I think I just had like a subtle mistake, or I like slipped off something. And then my second try, I was like, I'm doing it. And then I dry fired off of you know, one of the holds. And then I came down and I was like, I don't have a split. I don't even have like a crease. Like, this is amazing. Like, I'm going to get a third try. And it almost felt like I was on like a borrowed attempt, you know, like I wasn't supposed to get it. Like, and so I was like, you know what? Like, I get a third try today. Like, I'm just going to appreciate the fact that I get to try a third time, you know? And I think that's kind of the mentality that I went into it with. And then, yeah, when I pulled on, I felt like I was just like, I felt like I was underwater, you know, that feeling of just being like, you know, everything just starts to feel like you're just kind of swirling around underwater, and your senses are just dulled to everything else around you. And you just don't think, you know, you just move. And it was a great feeling, you know. And I do remember getting onto the sloper rail and being like, I had this weird little thought that crept in that was just like, it doesn't feel like as good as it should. Like, it's definitely not. And I was just like, you're here, fight. Like, you're here, just try, you know? And that's just kind of, that was the only thing that kind of crept in, was just like acknowledging that it wasn't good. But because I was there on it and I hadn't gotten that far in a long time, that I just needed to fight. And I think that was a really good switch to pull, because I needed that to get through the finish, was just to like, don't take too much stock in how you're feeling right now, just fucking fight, you know. And that's how I felt through kind of the end of it, was just battle mode. It may not look like it in the video, because it's just kind of, it looks all like chill and whatever, but that was definitely like, I was just like gripping the shit out of everything and making sure that I wasn't fucking anything up. So
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah,
it
it's
was a good
funny.
moment.
Yeah, battling on in Yosemite, not super steep, never looks quite like
Yeah.
yelling and muscles flexing. It just doesn't quite have that quality. You know, I love hearing this stuff, and I'm going to repeat something I know I said in the last podcast, but it's because it was so important for me when I heard it said by you in your video, the Swiss account, the one where you made it, you made the video, you were in Switzerland, and you made some comment around there's a lot of people who are strong enough, but actually getting it done that in that moment, and just hearing how like when things weren't perfect, there was still like, no, you got, you're here, this is an opportunity, and balancing that like do or die, but also you get another moment. It's just this complex web of emotions and how you navigate through actually succeeding. Because I just think that that's one of the things I like about climbing and bouldering. And, sometimes it feels really good to do a hard move. You're like, look, I'm strong. I did this move, but that's not quite what the challenge is. It's bringing it all together, not having your foot slip on the easy part, like finishing. And I can't believe how, Carlo, I'm just blown away by when you started talking about wet chalk versus super fresh chalk. And actually, I got to ask you, what shoes did you wear? Not that we're sponsored here, and just like what? Well,
Yeah.
you're sponsored. Like, how do you think about shoe choices?
I actually don't have a shoe sponsor right now, so
Oh, okay.
if anyone wants to give me some shoes, let me know. No, I'm just kidding. I don't really need a shoe sponsor, these days. I was grateful to be a part of the 510 team for 16 years, and I had a great
Wow,
relationship
16.
with them. Yeah, great relationship with them, and helped design shoes, helped come up with ideas for shoes, tested shoes. Was a huge part of that process for a long time, and really enjoyed that experience. And I'm grateful that I'm in a place now where I can buy my shoes and it not affect my bottom line, and ability to survive and live. Cause that wasn't the case, maybe 10 years ago. Like, I actually kind of needed that to be able to keep doing what I was doing. But yeah, I used La Sportiva Squamas on the dark side. I
Hmm.
found that they were just I think a lot of shoes could work on it. I don't think it was super shoe specific, I would say. But yeah, the Squamas were a nice blend of they were basically brand new, and they needed to be basically brand new to have like this, just that last little bit of rubber on the edge. And then they're a nice blend of sensitivity and stiffness, I found, where I could feel the footholds, but also be able to put a lot of weight on them without them folding at all. And I found the 510 Alien when they were brand new worked pretty well on that climb too, because they have a really defined toe point that kind of helps get into some of the smaller edges and stuff on the feet. And there's a few shoes that worked, but I had new squamas, and that's kind of what I used last year when I got really close to it. And so I made sure that I had a brand new pair this year, and yeah, it worked out. It worked out good. So
I just gotta ask, what about on Dominator?
Dominator, I originally did it with Aliens, 510 Aliens, because I was still on 510 when I did that. But I've done it now in like 5 or 6 different pairs of shoes. So the beta works with kind of anything, I think. So maybe not super flat shoes, but
God, I'm kind of surprised that that squamas are what you end up using. They just seem a little floppy, a little soft to me for the not so steep granite, but maybe that's how you can get that rubber on. And yeah, it just kind of
you
surprises me.
need a little bit of flex on that one because you need to wrap your toe into some things, and so they can't just be a total stiff board. And so you need that little bit. And the squamas, when they're brand new, are pretty stiff on the toe point, like stiff enough to put enough weight that you need to. But they were just the right blend of that. You know, I agree. They're soft. They've got that split midsole that definitely tends to flex a little more. But I found that when they were brand new, they worked well. But I definitely didn't get much out of a brand. You know, like after a couple weeks of wearing them, I think I would probably have to put another brand new pair on, which is just the way that it goes
Yeah,
sometimes. So
I hate to say it because I've seen people climb amazingly hard and shoes with holes. Like I remember
yeah,
seeing, I won't, I feel like I shouldn't name the name or name the shoe name, but I've seen people climb hard V13 in shoes that were, you could rent at the gym. But I will say when I put on a fresh pair of shoes, I'm one of those people who actually likes brand new shoes. Maybe I've warmed up in them, but man, when you get that new edge and they just feel so, I like, yeah. Anyways, yeah, yeah,
that's
go get
that granite
sponsored sometime.
vibe.
Yeah.
That's that granite. If you love good techie granite, then a fresh edge is like kind of amazing, in my opinion. But I think people that climb on sandstone and limestone more often, actually, the fresh edge sometimes is at a disadvantage. I've found it can be really slippery on some
Mm.
of those things where you're looking to get a lot more surface area on the rocks. So it's very rock specific, I think, for the age of your shoes even. So
Sometimes it messes with my head when I go to sandstone and there's like this giant foot. And I'm like, but where do I put my foot? Like
yeah, yeah,
there's too much there. Give me like a little dime to like, I know where I need to put my foot there, but
yeah, totally.
interesting, man. I last time we chatted, we made an Instagram reel out of this and people just flipped out about it because it's the grade debate. Like when we had last chatted, Will Bosey had just repeated Burden of Dreams, and
Mhm.
we talked a little bit about 9A, V17, and I'm bringing it up because I'm wondering if anything has changed in your opinion about you. Kind of said, hey, maybe this grade does exist, and it seems like Burden took really good climbers a long time, and it did get repeated, and I don't know if that means it's confirmed or not, but basically, I'm wondering, has this experience with the dark side and what's happened over the last, gosh, like 8 months, like, do you have any updates on your opinion on, you know, V17 grade or grade inflation in general?
I think it's mostly the same. I don't think much has changed for me in that regard, but it's been interesting to kind of watch more of the news with harder sends coming. I think in terms of the dark side, like I talked with Jimmy about this a lot. If it was perfect conditions and you didn't split your tip on it and you had all the beta, I think that the dark side physically is maybe no harder than like a V14 boulder. But the thing is that it's not that. Like you barely get good conditions on it, and no matter how good your skin is, it's going to split on this hold because it's just the way that the hold is. It's just it tears up everybody, and so I kind of graded it with those factors in mind, but it definitely changed how I maybe view how things should be graded depending on conditions and the efforts required to do it. I think the fact too that you only get a very, very small amount of efforts to try this thing, especially from the bottom, changes the grade of it, because if you're only getting 2 or 3 tries a day, like it adds so much more time to like how much you have to put into to completing it, and also adds so much more value to each individual effort. So whereas you've got problems on sandstone that were mostly slopey, and you can literally just put hours and hours, like 50 100 tries a day from the bottom, if you have the physical capacity to do it. But I think that the most interesting thing happening right now is in grading, is I think all of the repeats of Sleepwalker I've found to be extremely interesting, because there have been some climbers that I kind of put up on a pedestal as being extremely talented and strong, and they've had trouble doing that climb. Like Jakob came out to Red Rocks, I think it was like maybe 2 years ago, or a year or two ago, and tried it a lot. And I thought he was going to do it really fast because he's exceptionally talented and strong boulder, route climber, everything. And I I tried it with him one day, and he was just like, man, I just can't seem to do it, like, and he looked good on all the moves and stuff and just couldn't quite pull it together, and he was in good shape, all that. And there's been other climbers too that I thought were going to do it pretty easily and just didn't. And then there's climbers, that some younger kids that don't have the same kind of background or the same kind of tick list behind them, and they're walking up it, they're not walking up it, but they're doing it pretty quickly, like comparatively. And so I thought that thing, when I've tried it, felt like harder than most the V15s that I've tried, like it feels like it's on that level, but then you've got a lot of younger kids saying that maybe it's not, and I don't know if the sandstone's weird in that way, because I do think that crimp slot on Sleepwalker has gotten better
Mm.
over the years, because as you brush the sandstone, it can tend to like wear away. And with a slot in particular, the more you brush it, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And I know the last time that I tried it, I was like, this hold feels better to me than it was before. And so maybe that's changed. Maybe holds have changed on that climb. Um, but I do find that to be one of the more interesting aspects of the grade thing. And that's what my opinion all along has been. Like, we're not going to know where this stuff actually is until we get enough repeats that it becomes a consensus. There's no point in speculating what the actuality of the grade is until it's been repeated a bunch. And that's why when I talk about the dark side, I specifically wanted to use the word suggested, because rather than saying this is this, and it's purely a suggestion, it's one opinion. I'm suggesting that this is V16 based off of my experience climbing other V15s, trying other V15s, my experience climbing on it, what it took me to do it and whatnot. Is that I do think that it's a fair suggestion, and that's based off of conversations that I've had with other people that have tried it as well. And that's all you can do. That's all I can do, is I can put a suggestion out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing other people try it and giving a suggestion. And I think that as long as their suggestion for the grade is based off of their experience and not based off of ego or other factors, any sort of like emotional factors that might change that, whether they're trying to prove a point or this and that, just purely an objective experience that they had, then like I think it's going to change how things are viewed and whatnot in the future. So
Sometimes suggesting a grade like that too may draw some more interest, which, for better or for worse, like, some people are chasing that grade. And so they might go, oh, I want to go find out if it is that grade. And I think that's fine.
I
You know,
learned that from a lot of years of grading things V12 in Yosemite, is that when people think they're supposed to be climbing V12, and then they like get kind of beat down on that problem, that they don't want to try the boulder anymore, because they don't want to fail that hard on a V12. And it's an interesting mental test, I find, for Yosemite. And we kind of I tested people in a weird way for a long time by giving the V12 grade to a lot of things and it wasn't intentional in the moment, but I realized later that it's been this interesting test of like what gets done, what gets repeated. People are not psyched to put that much time into something that's below their limit and not get the points they think they deserve for it, you know? And I've always found that to be different. It's just like I don't assign like the value of the climb based off of the points that it has, the V points, whatever points you're using. That's not where it's valuable to me at all. Like the dark side is not valuable to me because it's V16. It's valuable to me because of the time and energy and the effort that I put into it and kind of the historical aspects of it and components that went into it. And I just wish that more people separated those experiences, you know, like I've gotten so much from, you know, in font or other areas from beatdowns on V10s still, you know, like climb V16 and I've put days into V10s. And I find those to be some of the most valuable climbs that I've done. And it's like, you know, some people would be upset with the fact that they're not getting the points they feel like they deserve for the efforts they put into that. And I think that you really, as you grow as a climber, need to learn how to separate those two things because you're going to gain a lot from it.
Well, it's really short-sighted too. And, ideally you look back a couple of years later and recognize that, yes, you did get those 7 points, on that fluffy one, or you only got V5 on some not fluffy one, but now
Yeah.
you're a V10 climber and who cares? And I do think that I mean, and I gotta say, I've been sucked into it too, but it's really dangerous to think that way just for your growth because you start slowly but surely, like only looking for things that are easy for you. You
Mm-hmm.
only want success. And and the stories, cause me and Tim just kind of did a pod talking about like, don't lie to yourself. Like, and because when you start lying to yourself, you start ending up shifting where you're going without even realizing it because you may recognize it's a lie at first and then you say it 20 times and then all of a sudden you believe it too. It's like now you find that you're lowering your ceiling because you're avoiding the things that are hard.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go into it always with a mastery mentality rather than like tracking things based off of where you're at in the grade scale, then you're always going to end up in a better place at the end of it, you know? And it's like if you're challenged by something, then that's an opportunity for you to get better. And it has nothing to do with the grade. It's just that if this poses a challenge, then it's because there's something in your climbing that hasn't been developed enough to do it. And so now you have this opportunity with this challenge in front of you to develop that aspect of your climbing. And so I'm always like looking for those things that are kind of under the radar, that are like hiding, you know, like V6s where I'm like, I can't do this, what's going on, you know? And it's like fun. You're not like bummed out about getting shut down on a V6. You're like shit, there's something I'm missing here. Like what am I missing here? And then you've got this fun process of trying to figure out what's missing in your mastery of climbing that you know you didn't realize, you know. And I think it's like it's almost like finding like a little gold nugget hiding out there in the world, you know. And I love those things. Like that's really what I'm looking for on a regular basis when I go out climbing, is just finding those little things that help sharpen my toolkit, you know.
One of the things that we've kind of lost a little bit of is mentorship, and it's just not because anyone's not being mentors, but because climbing has exploded so much that it's hard to take everyone under your wing and help them out. But I think about when I got taken to Bishop for the first time, and I don't even know if there was a guide, but I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But this guy took me. He had developed a lot of this stuff. Dave Friedman. I can't remember his name now. That's terrible. A long time ago. And he's like, "Hey, try this one. Like, this is cool. Like, you're gonna like it." And it's the Hunk. It's like a V2, and it's really cool. And he's like, "Hey, like, here, this one, like Pope's Prow." And he didn't really even tell me the grade or know the grade. It wasn't about that. It was like, "Hey, these are cool climbs. Like, let's go do them." And he knew that they were cool. Although, and with Bob's Brow, he said, "If you flash this, I'll buy a six pack because it's a very difficult V4, V5. I don't even know. It's hard." And I just kind of think that that's one of the things that's fun to lean into when you think about history and test pieces, is that in some ways that is part of that mastery journey, is you get taken to these things like, give this one a try. Like, it might kick your butt, you might crush it, but it's part of that circuit that you need to expose yourself to and go have a blast. I think that's
Yeah.
so fun.
Yeah, for sure. I've found that it's not normal, I feel like, for people to approach it that way too. I mean, I see so many people come up to me while I'm climbing outside, and the first thing that they ask is how difficult the climb is that I'm trying. And I tend to not give a straight answer to that, like, ever, because I feel like there is no real straight answer a lot of the time, you know? And I think people might get frustrated by that fact, because I usually kind of dance around it a little. Like, when it's like, oh, well, you know, like, well, you know, I think for some people on some days it might feel like this, and for other times it might feel like that. But, you know, like, for me today, it feels kind of impossible, and I'm just trying to figure out why it's like that. And you know, like, or, you know, this person thought it was this, and this person thought it might be this, so maybe it's somewhere in between those two. And they're kind of just like, well, yeah, but what is it? And I'm like, there's no it's like the system's broken. Like,
Well, let's try it. You try it.
yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah,
find
just try
out.
to figure it out. You can figure out what it is for you, you know? Like, so it's like, I don't know. There, it's the, it's too absolute, you know? Like, I think people think in terms of absolutes too much with the grading scale, and it isn't that way. It's not informed by that. It's not, there's just no absoluteness to it. And so we have to get away from that feeling.
So on that note, you've been doing a bunch of other hard climbs in Yosemite, and kind of how did they stack up? You know, I want to say you just put up a V14 to use the grade, but I didn't know anything about. Just you were really psyched on some
Yeah.
recent FA, and just how you know, how have the other developments been going for you in Yosemite?
It's been an incredible year for Yosemite development. You know, Jimmy hadn't climbed there the last couple years, like, as frequently, I feel like. And this year he was motivated to get back. And so we kind of dug in together on a lot of things. I found some new areas in this river zone that yielded a lot more holds than other parts of the valley, and a little bit more athletic climbing. And Jimmy quickly did a couple new V14s in a couple weeks span, and I think another, like, I don't know, something in the 12, 13 range. But and not to just throw numbers out there, these are things that I had tried a lot and couldn't do. And one of them I showed him, I had tried for probably 10 or 12 days, and I knew it was hard, and I had done the moves on it, and I'd done it kind of from a stand start. But I hadn't, I couldn't do these two crux moves in a row. And, you know, they're not my style. It's very big, like, just like thuggy climbing on bad kind of slopey holds and underclings and stuff. And I loved trying it because it wasn't my style, and I knew that it wasn't my style, and I knew someone like Jimmy would have really good success on it. But I was pretty impressed with how quickly he did it. He did it in like a day, and it was sick. And he's definitely in maybe the best shape I've ever seen him. And it's been awesome to climb with him as consistently as I have been for the last 15 years, but even more nowadays. And, you know, people don't talk as much about Jimmy these days, and I feel like he kind of flies under the radar most of the time, because he doesn't talk about a lot of the stuff that he's climbed. But I'd say that in the last year, I don't think there's any person on earth who's put up, you know, the first ascent of as many hard boulder problems as him. And I would say that the majority of the ones that he's put up may eventually be some of the hardest boulder problems in the world, because, you know, he put them up, he probably undergraded them to some degree, because they fit his style really well. And they're exceptionally hard. And it's been cool to see his, like, continued progression. And it was fun to kind of tour him around these areas that I've spent a lot of time in, and kind of watch him get after some of these projects and whatnot. And he did another one too that we had been trying a different way to climb this thing. And one session, we both kind of figured out that we could climb it more direct, essentially, as this big kind of a ret feature. And he just went to work on it, and it's hard. Like, it's very hard. I think I did all the moves but one on it, but it pushed me hard. And he finished that one up pretty quickly, and that one's exceptionally hard. And then he did a new dyno that is very, very difficult as well. And then that we had kind of put to work in on this really big wall that eventually I called it the Rookery. And it's this boulder that I had found in 2013. I put chalk on it then. A couple years later, I cleaned up the slab top out a bit, but it had kind of this kind of a rough landing underneath it. And then this year we really cleaned it up. So Roman and Jimmy and Max Krimmer was there, and we kind of like cleaned up the climb and started to do a little bit of work on the landing. And then I think Roman like really worked on the top section and got it like fully kind of cleaned up and put together. And then Jimmy and a crew of people like, you know, got the landing kind of leveled out and stuff, while I was, you know, home working or whatever. And then I had one day on the dark side where I nearly split my tip first try, but I didn't quite split it. And so I was like, I'm done for the day. And I was like, I've climbed for an hour and I just almost split my tip. And so I'm done. And I was like, I'll go down to the river and check on that project and maybe try the moves on it. And luckily just somehow kind of pieced together the moves pretty quickly. And it just kind of fit my style. And I think originally when I was trying the Rookery, I was trying it the way that I thought a taller climber would try it, and it felt impossible. And I somehow found some beta that allowed me to turn it into a small box boulder. And that quick beta find, I like somehow just got through the bottom section and just pulled through. And it's like a 35-foot boulder problem with an insane top out, and definitely one of the, I think it's maybe top 5 best boulder problems I've ever done. And it's insane. And it's just like huge, perfect rock, perfect moves. It's got a full all points off dyno in the middle of it to like a jug. And then like a tricky knee bar section to get around onto the slab. And then just like delicate, like V3, V4 slab climbing above like a no fall zone at the top. And it's amazing. And so I was psyched. I honestly, I was a little bummed that I didn't try it with those guys very much because I wanted to kind of like work on it with them. And honestly, that day that I went there, I was just kind of like, oh, maybe I'll get caught up to where they're at, you know, like so that next time when I come back with them, like we'll all be in kind of the same place on it. And David Fitzgerald put some effort in on it as well. But I was like just stoked to kind of like catch up to where they were at. And I just somehow just like randomly pulled it out. And it was a weird day in that regard, but it's rad.
Oh, I can't wait to see that footage. I saw the picture. It looks mega. God, you guys are it's just amazing line after amazing line that are really, really hard. And yeah, you know, we don't need to get into the grade debate more, but they're hard and
Yeah.
they're beautiful. And when those go together, I mean, I think I have a hunch that that's what we're all chasing, right? You know, the most
Yeah.
beautiful climbs that ask the most of you, which is
Totally. Yeah,
mastery and
that
aesthetic.
the Rookery too, I thought I could have given it 13 for a second, and then I was feeling in really good shape this fall, and I just couldn't do it, especially with like the way the kind of grades had been kind of, people weren't trying stuff because of it getting so undergraded. And I was like, anywhere else in the world, this would be like cusping on V14 plus or something like that, you know, like it's hard. It's really hard. It was hard for me. And I thought it was a really physical effort to get it done. So I think the grade will stand, but
So
we'll
I'm
see.
just okay. I know I said I wasn't going to do great stuff. I'm just curious, like what these conversations are like with you, Jimmy. I'm sure you know Randy, Roman. Everyone chimes in. When I think about grading, I do think that it's often like it has to be perfect conditions, perfect beta, and that's kind of like our metric. But then it's interesting because what you're saying about the dark side is that may be the case, but the reality of how those conditions actually come about have this factor where it's like, yeah, you might have one day every 3 years or something, you know?
Yeah.
And so how did that conversation go where you're like physically, but then like technical is part of it. And when it's so technical, it sounds like also it's not just and do exactly what Carlo did because he figured out the best technique. It's like, okay, you're your size,
Mm-hmm.
you have different size hands, it's going to be a completely new puzzle. Yeah. How did that conversation go?
It's hard. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations over the years. I think the more frequent conversations nowadays is like those guys are just giving me shit for being a sandbagger in the valley, you know. And I'm like, I feel bad now because I'm like, you know, I I I want the valley to stay stiff for sure. Like I don't want it to be like a soft place to just go pad the tick list, but I also don't want to be like an epic sandbagger, you know, like when they're telling me that V12s that I put up or maybe V14, you know, that's problematic in my eyes. That's me not being like aware of what I'm doing and what's going on, you know, and that the same goes for the other direction, you know, like if I'm grading way over grading stuff somewhere, then like I think that would be problematic. That means I'm not like understanding of what's happening on the grade scale and where things are at. And you give grades to give people an indication of what they're in for. It's like it's a suggestion to kind of indicate what the process is going to probably take from them, and what kind of proficiency as a climber you're going to need to bring to be able to accomplish it. And it's not perfect. And so I think for a long time I was putting things up in the valley and I hadn't done Dominator, and I was like, well, if I haven't done the V13 that Jerry did in 1993 or whatever, then how can I grade anything V13 here if I can't do that one? And it's a closed-minded approach to it, but I think initially that's what I was thinking, was just like, maybe I'm not at that level for the valley yet, and maybe these things that I'm doing are not at that level because of that, and that was in 2013 when I first kind of came back and started climbing there a lot, and I was putting up a couple V12s, and I was like, okay, these not Dominator hard, so like maybe V12, like, and that seemed fine to me. I wasn't looking for the points. I just was trying to assess a difficulty for where I was at. And then, over the years, it kind of started becoming like a joke in a way, but also I realized that I wanted people to experience these climbs for what they are as a rock climb, not for what they are as a number. And I think that by having them be on the stiffer end means that people come to the valley because they want to experience the valley bouldering, and they want to experience that climb for a specific reason, not because they're going to get some points out of it or some number out of it. And so the joke was always like, nobody travels for a V12, no hard climbers will go somewhere to pad their tick list with V12s nowadays, and I know that might sound like elitist, but it's like for the upper end of the scale, like you don't get people like traveling from Colorado or traveling from Europe to come over and just like, rampage on V12s, mainly because their sponsors are not going to be stoked when they report back that they spent the whole trip climbing a couple V12s, when they're climbing at like V15 level or whatever. And so I wanted people to come to the valley because they wanted to experience the climbing for the climbing, not for that grade element of things. And I kind of carried that through for a long time, and I probably pushed it a little bit too far, in that like around the 2020 year, I was putting up some things that were pretty severely undergraded, like Split in Two, which is the stand start to that thing that Pablo did, that he'd put up the sit start. He called it Level Terrace Apart. And it's hard. And I put up the stand to that. And honestly, that one I kind of did feel like it was probably V12 in my eyes. But like Bel Cerizo and Soriceto were two other ones that I put up that haven't been repeated, that I gave V13 to both of those. And those may be harder. And there's another one in Camp 4 that I did, which is a sit start to Jimmy's Control Theory, which is right behind Thriller. And I put up a sit start to that I called V13, that before doing, I realize this in retrospect, but now that I've done the dark side, I think that one's probably the second hardest thing that I've done in Yosemite. So the V13 grade might be off on that as well. So there's a lot of them that are probably severely undergraded, and people haven't tried them a lot of the time because of that, So I don't know what's the right answer. I just know that I was trying to make sure that there was an area where people were going into it with maybe a slightly different thought process as to their experience there than they were other areas in the world. It's like, you've got Rocklands, you've got Switzerland, you've got these areas where people go to where they're like, I just want to have fun and take a bunch of hard stuff and everything's great and whatnot. And I think I wanted Yosemite to just be a little bit different in terms of how people came there and experienced the bouldering and whatnot. And I hope that people, even if the grades go up a little bit, that people still come at it with that approach. That's always been the goal, is just kind of cultivating like a different experience,
Well, I mean, I think that Yosemite just encapsulates the pursuit of mastery because of everything that you have to do there. It just, the climbs, it's not that the things you're talking about are death defying, but the climbs are tall and impressive. I mean, when you stand beneath almost any of these lines, there's a weighty element to them. And then even the easier climbs, or even the easier outro, just requires so much knowledge about how to climb on that type. And so I think regardless of what grade you end up doing, it kind of pushes you into this mastery mindset as long as you're willing to embrace it. But you took, dude, that description of conditions and chalk that you went through, like literally, Carl, you kind of blew my mind about how deep you took the mastery. And I was just listening to the episode we did before, at least a good chunk of it, and you made a comment about how you didn't want to just do something. You didn't want to just do something, i.e., climbing. You wanted to do it as well as you possibly could. And yeah, it's just cool seeing. It's cool seeing you pull these layers back that I didn't even necessarily knew existed. Like, and I've been doing it for a while, and just thinking about how long my chalk bag has been exposed to air and how that might influence the feeling. I know you didn't break it down to exact science, but just even trying it,
Yeah.
I just applaud you for that.
The wet chalk thing is something that I've experimented with a lot in the last couple years, and I think I had a chalk bag that I brought to Font one year, and I brought a couple chalk bags with me, and one of them got wet. It got left in a pad in the rain, and it got soaked. And I like had it, and I was like, "Ah, shit, I can't use this. I should just like leave. Well, I'll bring it out and just kind of let it dry out and see what happens or whatever." And then one day it was really cold and really dry, and there was like a dry wind in Font. And Font is not have very much texture, so everything's pretty slippery. Like, and so when your skin's really dry and the rock's really dry, it just feels like glass. Like you can't hold on to anything. And I kind of understood this idea of sticky damp there, where like you'd have it right after a rain, there'd be like a little bit of moisture, like on the surface of the rock, not like soaked in, but just like barely left over kind of humidity that was kind of sticking to the rock. And you'd get this sticky damp feeling where everything felt like Velcro. And so I started playing with that on like a super dry day where I was dipping my hands in like this putty wet chalk and like letting it dry just like a little bit on my hands. And like all of a sudden, these problems that I was struggling with that day started to feel like a lot easier. And like maybe it's just like a better version of like the way they were using POF and stuff back in the days, but at least this is like not going to permanently alter the rock and whatnot. So but I was like, man, there's something to this wet chalk thing, you know, like, and I've heard that the Japanese climbers use it in the gym. They've got chalk that has different, like that has moisture in it and whatnot. And they're using it
Oh
to
wow.
stick to the fiberglass in the gym. And I've experimented with it a ton in the gym now on fiberglass and on the holds. And I need it to have a certain level of humidity to feel really good on certain holds. And I think in comps, I'm going to start using it more, but bringing like a spray thing with water and wetting my hands. I'm actually wetting my hands now more than like focusing on like the chalk up thing in basically all of my climbing now. So
Are you a really dry skin person, or you said you get splits? Because I'm a sweater, so I often antihydral really helps me. Are
yeah,
you, yeah? Which end of the spectrum do you lie on?
I'm right in the middle, man. I don't have exceptionally dry skin, but I don't have exceptionally wet either. If I'm in a dry climate, my skin will dry out like a lot, like too dry. But if I'm in a wetter climate, my hands will be like sweaty and wet. And when it's hot, I definitely my hands sweat a lot. But when it's cold and dry, I don't sweat that much. So I think I'm right in the middle of the road. But I think it is important to understand where how your skin reacts to different environments, and then also the different ways that you can control your skin in those circumstances and whatnot. And obviously, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but I think that there are way more ways to control it than people realize. So
Fucking awesome, man. Well, so this pursuit of mastery and all these layers are absolutely incredible. You mentioned something to me about maybe tying into a rope more often in 2024. Is that something you can share? Any goals you have that are we can talk about, or should we just save it for the next podcast?
I don't really like to talk about my future projects, mainly because, and my goals and whatnot, mainly because I just don't right now have like a timeline for like what those look like. I have just this incredible list of things that I want to continue to do in climbing. I have my wife's gonna, give birth basically at any day now. So like, I don't know what that's going to do to my climbing life in the short term. I know what I want it to be in the long term, but it's hard to know what kind of control I'm going to have over it in the short term. So I'm trying to be pretty relaxed about those things.
No
But
comment. Yeah, no comment.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Good
I know
luck.
you know about that. So, but
Congratulations, though.
I appreciate that. But I also I think sometimes people use their their goals and projects as a way to elevate their status in the climbing world. And by them just talking about all the things that they want to do and the things that they're working on, they try and gain some sort of like kind of status around that and whatnot. And I'm kind of the opposite. I'd rather keep my projects close and my goals close to me, and they feel more personal that way, and they feel more like they're mine, my goals, not something that I owe to climbing, not something that I owe to my sponsors, not something that I owe to the people that follow me or the world out there. And I think that that's an important separation for me, is just to have feel personal about the things that I want to do. And I don't mind talking with other friends, talking with other people. I just don't really make them very public. But yeah, I think 2024 will look, I hope to look a little bit more of a route climbing year. I think that finishing the dark side, I feel like I really dug in deep on bouldering for the last year or two, and I felt really good about where that process ended. And I think that I want to go back into the root side of things, because I think there's some things that I need to learn about myself and my climbing through that, through strategy, through endurance, through how I'm approaching longer things. And I think that there's a lot to gain from that, since I haven't done that really since I climbed Magic Line, a couple years back. So I'm looking forward to more route climbing this year. I have some very, very lofty ambitions in that regard, and some places that I want to take my climbing. But like I said, with having a baby and with life changes and stuff, it's very hard to know exactly what that's going to look like. So.
Dude, I love that commentary about goal setting and doing it to, in some ways make yourself look better. I feel like I've definitely I feel like I've done that before. So but I like your approach. I also know that there's some studies that have been done that showcase that if you talk about a goal, somehow it takes some of it's like you get some of the joy now. It basically, like, the more you talk about a goal, in some ways, like, the less likely it is to occur, which is interesting. And I just am going to be interested in seeing how you bring these deep layers of mastery into rope climb. I have this image of you with like 3 different chalk bags, and like, depending, like, while you're on, like, okay, what kind of hold is this? Like, how are my fingers feeling? Wet, dry,
Totally.
good stuff. I just want to, before I ask you for your pro tip, I just want to plug for you the Boulder Field, because we didn't talk about it. I forgot to even mention that you, amongst all your other accomplishments, you also have one of the coolest gyms that you founded, one of the coolest gyms, I'm going to say, in the world. And I just think that anyone who's listening should go and visit and do it, because hearing how deep you went into the dark side, that kind of love of going deep on the climbing, that, the things you love. I know you took it into the gym realm as well. And my favorite example is when you took me early on and showed me the setting room. And this is something that's behind the wall that other people don't get to see. And it reminds me of the what was it, Steve Jobs quote, where he, maybe not quote, but a little anecdote, where he wanted the circuit board and the inside of the computer to look beautiful, even though no one would see it, just because, of course, you want it to be beautiful. You want it all to be beautiful. So everyone, go check out the Boulder Field in Sacramento. And with that,
I
I
appreciate
will,
that.
yeah, and I mean it. And with that, I'll see if you got a pro tip number 2 for us.
Pro tip number 2. I mean, I thought about this a lot. I think I've got kind of 2 tips, and we kind of covered these a little bit in the the process of chatting today. But I think that I like to emphasize that, and the thing that I've learned the most from climbing, at least in the most recent years, is that there's so much emphasis on pulling. And I think I realized that climbing is far more of a pushing sport than a pulling sport. And if you look at each of your hands and your feet independently, and you think about what's doing what at any time, you're typically doing far more pushing than you are pulling. And really, your pulling motion most of the time is just keeping you close enough to the wall to be able to grab the next hold, while your legs are pushing you where you're going. And the other element of pushing is that when I grab a hold, I'm not thinking about pulling on that hold. I'm thinking about how I'm interacting when I grab it. And a lot of times I'm able to create better control over, my climbing by pushing between a hold that I go for. So when I grab a hold, I'm actively pushing down into my feet when I grab it rather than pulling up on it. And I think that that's another element of the push conversation that doesn't get talked about a lot in climbing. And I think when you start to see climbing as a pushing sport rather than a pulling sport, I think your technique will kind of jump in leaps and bounds. And it's a lot to grasp. It's a lot to kind of wrap your mind around, and you really have to reprogram how you move from the start
Jeez, man,
to see it that way. So
just blowing my mind here. It totally makes sense, and I love how you phrased it. And I also think one of the things that it highlights where some of the biggest mistakes I've made, and I think a lot of climbers make, is that what they do is they pull up and then they take way off their feet and their feet blow and they fall off. It's got
yeah,
to be one of the most common issues you see, especially when people get excited or get scared, and just thinking about it in this other way about pushing first instead of pulling first.
yeah.
Amazing pro
Mo-
tip.
Most times your arms are there to position your hips and your body in a place that your feet can push you in the right direction that you want to go. And so the arms are not the pieces of the puzzle that are going to give you the power to get there. It's your legs that are going to push you to where you want to go. It's your arms that are basically positioning you so that you can, make the most use of those footholds. And there's obvious exceptions to that, like pure campus boulders, this and that are obviously going to require a lot more pushing. But I even tell people on the campus board, when you campus to a subsequent rung and you want to go to the next one, the lower rung is almost more important than the upper rung, because you need to be pushing off of that lower rung to help with the pull motion on the other arm. Most people are just like, that upper arm, since it's ahead of the other one, is the one doing all the pulling work and like the one arm pull up to get to the next one. But that's not how climbing works. It's the holds that you've come from to, and how you continue to interact with those, that are just as important as the hold that looks to be the highest up the wall. And so I think if people start to see their climbing in that way, I think that they'll make, big gains on in a technical sense. And they'll also be more efficient climbers, and they won't need all of this strength and pull strength that they think that they need to achieve their goals in climbing. I see so many people just being like, yeah, if I can hold this much weight on the bar or put this much weight on the hangboard, then I'll be able to climb this grade. And I'm just like, you're not going to be able to do anything with that finger power if you don't also know how to orient yourself over your feet to get where you're going, because your legs are so much stronger than your hands will ever be.
Yeah, we I didn't do a good job of tying these two things together, but we had talked before about how your time on Meltdown and Magic Line, I think especially Magic Line seems very, very foot dependent, very lots of weight on your feet, and how that translated into doing Dark Side, which I got to share my little anecdote on that, where I had been sport climbing in Kalymnos, and it was just thuggy, or not. It's just I was not doing hard moves, but I had tons of weight on my feet, because on a 40-meter sport climb, you better be on your feet. It's just
Yeah.
mandatory. And then I came and did Yabo Roof really easily when I shouldn't have been. I was in sport climbing shape. I had weak fingers, but it really revolves, even though it's kind of powerful and thuggy, but really it's about standing on these slopey feet. And I put tons of weight on them. And sure enough, like, weaker yet sending. And just that always stood out in my head, is like, whoa, I just learned something.
Yeah. I mean, the, the industry of climbing has moved heavily into training elements, and there's a lot of money being poured into people paying for training, giving training advice, and it's mostly structured around how to improve in a physical sense. And I think that needs to be the smallest piece of the puzzle, and there's very, very few resources out there about how to move well in your climbing, because it's just not it's not like sexy, it's not like the fun thing to do. It doesn't feel like this training thing, like the Rocky style, like get strong, get better type of feeling. It's more of like this dedicated practice of improving your motion and whatnot. And I think one of my goals for the next couple years is figuring out how to adequately educate the climbing community about about how to move better rather than focusing so much on the physical elements. And that's definitely something that I'm going to prioritize in terms of like what I'm giving to the climbing community. But it's hard, you know, and I think that's the easy thing, or that's the hard thing, is that it's easy to write a training program when it comes to like, do this many pull-ups, do this many push-ups, do this many of this hangboard protocol, or, you know, add this much weight to here and there. But walking somebody through how to move really efficiently takes this one-on-one work, and it takes a lot more time and effort to put into that. And I think it's just something that's really hard to like roll out to the broader, you know, spectrum of climbers. But it really is the most important work in your climbing. You know, there's no easy path to being like an exceptional rock climber. You know, it takes time and energy, and I think pouring that into the technical side of stuff is going to be your most you know, it's going to go the furthest.
Yeah, 100%. I love that well, what I really love is that you're going to put effort into helping the industry with that. And I will say, I mean, that's a lot of what we try to do here. And I do think that the pendulum is swinging back towards that. You know, to play devil's advocate, there was a time in the past where climbers were sticks and technical and had no strength, and it was important for them to develop that strength. But you know, the pendulum always swings too far, and this is just to tie it back into the dark side. This is why I think it's so cool. This is why I think it'll go down in history, man. Is you had Midnight Lightning, which was just this kind of, you know, change of burliness and an era of even bouldering, and then it really culminates in Dominator being this very, very physical and fingery, small, low test piece. And then to me, the dark side has this. I mean, you know, I'm sure you have some finger power that is required there, but there's also this technical ability, and it's tall and it's striking. It's a accomplishment unto itself. So this is where I make this argument that I think it'll go down in history as being showcasing an element of our era. And I just, again, congrats, man. I'm also really grateful to get to hear that deep blow by blow and how many layers you went down. I had no idea. Literally just blew my mind, and just even better that you came out the other side triumphant after really pulling out every trick in the book and maybe even inventing a few. So congrats, man. Congrats again.
Thanks. I appreciate that, man. Yeah, and I appreciate, you know, you and Tim as well for having an awesome podcast that kind of delves into like some of the more nuanced aspects of climbing. I think it's an important resource to have out there, and you guys are doing a great job, you know, with all that stuff. I've listened to a number of them, and you guys are doing exceptional work. So
Well, thanks, Carlo. We'll have to have you on again to just drop even more knowledge, and we won't pin you down right now to any goal, and just, but I know that there's something big coming other than just a baby on the way. I gotta warn you that's that may be V16 in its own. There's lots of layers there, but
oh, dude, yeah,
yeah,
can't grade that one. You know, it's beyond grades.
it's a lifetime achievement award though, for sure. And
Exactly.
you know, my hunch is that, you know, you never know what you made. You may have just FA'd the first V18. You just don't realize it, because you know you make this little trickle down effect and you create the next generation. And that's why we do this stuff with podcasts, and you know, you talking about trying to assist the industry in focusing on the right things. You know, it's, you know, okay, this is my contribution to this era, and I love that yours really has been embodied in a single climb, even though it's way more. But I do think there's something about having something to point to that's like, this was an important moment, and it doesn't take away from all the other amazing climbs you did. But it's just, I don't know, man, it's cool when it's like flag in the ground. This one, right there in Camp 4 too, which is special. All right. Did you have another pro tip? Or I feel like you dropped so many along the way. It sounded like you had number two, but man, I just don't even want to sully that last one you did. That was just beautiful. So
I kind of wrapped them all up in there. I'd say I think the other one was, and we covered a lot of this, was just experimenting with like, you know, your optimal conditions and according to your situation and whatnot. And I think that it changes rapidly. Like I was telling somebody the other day that the dark side was good for that day that I did it. It was good for 20 minutes. And on either end of that 20-minute window, I couldn't hold the sloper rail. And so there was a 20-minute period there where the temperature and humidity reached their certain levels where like, and my skin was at a certain temperature and moisture level, that the sloper rail felt really good. And after I did it, I shot some photos on it right after, and I could hold it. And then after I packed up to go, I like just out of curiosity, like pulled on, I was like packing up and I was like, oh, I'll pull on the sloper rail again, see how it feels or whatever. And some combination of conditions or whatever, like the sun had just gone down, my skin was like a little bit colder and a little hardened up, and the rail just felt terrible. And really it was just this 20-minute window that just kind of opened up. And I guess the other pro tip really is just to like, if you need to, you can dig in exceptionally deep into kind of all levels of that experience, but you got to be there and you got to show up a lot to like see, how everything's interacting with other things, and always keeping kind of an open mind to the fact that it may not just be about like your body and your, how you're feeling that day. There's a lot of other factors involved, especially at the upper end of the sport. So
you got to show up. You got to show up. Get yourself that opportunity. Good stuff, man. Loved having you back on. That was amazing. Number 47 was great. And now we got another one to add. And congrats on the boulder. Congrats on the kid. What a year. Thanks, Carlo. Take care, man. Thank you again.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Testpiece climbing, you can check us out at testpiececlimbing.com and even book a session with one of our coaches.